The canyon was quiet, almost too quiet, the kind of silence that makes the air feel heavy. The sun was sinking behind the red cliffs, turning everything gold and shadowy. In the middle of that fading light hung a figure between two rough old trees. A woman. Her wrists were tied tight, her feet barely touching the ground, her head lowered as if the day had finally beaten her. The ropes creaked each time the wind pushed through, making the whole scene feel even more cruel. She wasn't crying anymore. She didn't have the strength for that. She just hung there, still and exhausted, waiting for something. Maybe rescue, maybe the end. The dirt around her was kicked up, showing a struggle. Whoever put her there wanted her to be found, or maybe they didn't care at all. Her dress was torn, dust-covered, and the skin on her arms was scratched raw. She tried to lift her head once, just to see if anyone was coming, but the effort drained what little energy she had left. Her breath came in small, shallow pulls. Each minute felt longer than the last. Then beneath all that silence, a new sound broke through. At first it was faint, almost like the echo of a distant storm. Then it grew stronger, steadier, clearer. Hoofbeats. Slow at first, then faster. The ground trembled lightly with each step, sending vibrations up the trees, holding her prisoner. Her eyes opened just enough to show fear, and maybe a spark of hope. A lone horse came into view, kicking up dust as it moved along the narrow trail. On its back sat a cowboy. Broad shoulders, hat pulled low, coat flapping lightly with each step. He didn't ride like a man out for a peaceful evening. He rode with purpose, with a sharpness in his posture that warned trouble was close behind him. The moment he saw her, he stopped, completely. No hesitation. His eyes narrowed as he took in the scene. The ropes, the bruises, the cruelty of it. He slid off his horse slowly, his boots landing with a heavy thud. Every step he took toward her was measured, controlled, like he was counting each breath to keep himself calm. He looked around the canyon, studying the tracks, the signs of struggle, the direction the attackers had gone. His jaw tightened, the muscle in it twitching once. And then, in a low voice filled with something dangerous, he muttered, "Not on my watch." She had never imagined her journey would end here, in a lonely canyon with no one to call her name. Just a few days earlier, everything in her life had felt hopeful, almost bright. She was a young woman with simple dreams, nothing grand, nothing wild. She wanted a piece of land to settle on, maybe a small cabin with a porch where she could watch the sunrise each morning. She wanted peace, a place to plant roots, somewhere quiet where she could build a life far from the noise and danger of the town she had passed through. She carried a small bag, a few coins, and endless determination. But dreams didn't stand a chance against the kind of men she crossed paths with. She had been traveling alone, something she knew was risky, but she believed the open road was safer than staying in a place where she didn't belong. She trusted her instincts, listened carefully to every stranger she met, and kept her distance when the world felt wrong. But sometimes danger doesn't come with warning signs. Sometimes it disguises itself as help, as friendliness, as harmless small talk. She had met the men at a small rest point near the river. There were 3 of them. They acted polite at first, smiles, easy questions, offers to help fill her water flask. She didn't like the way they watched her, the way their eyes stayed a moment too long, but she didn't want trouble. She kept her answers short, focused on her horse, and hoped they'd move on. But they didn't. Their politeness faded quickly once they realized she wasn't interested in talking, in laughing, in letting them close. They didn't like being ignored. They didn't like being told no. And men like that rarely walk away from something they want. When she rode away, she felt a twist in her stomach. Something told her to push harder, ride faster, put as much distance between them as she could. But the riverbed was rough, her horse was tired, and the shadows of the canyon stretched out in confusing ways. It wasn't long before she realized she was being followed. At first she heard whispers of movement behind her, twigs snapping, rocks shifting, but she wasn't sure. She told herself she was imagining it. But when she glanced back, she saw them. 3 shapes against the dying light, 3 riders gaining on her. She kicked her horse, urging it forward, but the canyon trail narrowed and twisted in ways she didn't expect. It felt like the land itself was trapping her, guiding her deeper into its stone walls. Her heart pounded as she looked for any chance to escape, but there was none. The men knew the terrain better than she did. They cornered her where the path curved sharply and the walls rose high around her. She saw their grins as they closed in, knowing she had nowhere left to run. They pulled her from her horse with rough hands, dragging her across the dirt while she fought with everything she had. She scratched, kicked, struggled, but it only made them laugh. They tied her wrists, ignoring her screams for help that echoed off the canyon walls and dissolved into the empty air. No one was near enough to hear her. No one was coming. They dragged her between two gnarled old trees and stretched her arms wide, securing the ropes so tightly they bit into her skin. They left her there like she was nothing more than a warning to others, or maybe a cruel joke for themselves to return to later. When they finally rode off, their laughter faded into the distance, leaving behind only silence and dust. She tried to stay calm, tried to think clearly, but fear made her chest tight. She tugged at the ropes, hoping one might give, but they held firm. The rough bark scraped her back each time she moved. Her muscles ached, her throat was dry, and her head felt heavy. Hours passed in slow, painful waves. The sun burned her. The wind chilled her. Every second stretched out like a lifetime. She thought of her family then. She pictured her mother's gentle smile, her father's quiet strength, her brother's teasing grin. She wondered if they would ever know what happened to her. She wondered if she would ever see them again. She tried not to cry, but tears came anyway, slipping silently down her dusty cheeks. She whispered small prayers, anything to keep her hope from dying out completely. As the sky darkened and the shadows grew longer, she started to feel her legs give out. Her body swayed against the ropes, her strength fading with each breath. She tried once more to lift herself, to stand tall, but she couldn't. The exhaustion was too deep. The pain was too sharp. Her vision blurred at the edges, turning the canyon into a hazy mix of gold and gray. She thought this was how it would end, alone, forgotten, suspended between two trees like a broken thing. But then, faint at first, she heard something that didn't belong to the canyon. A vibration, a soft rumble through the earth. She forced her eyes open, blinking away the blur. The sound grew louder, steady, strong hoofbeats. Not the playful trot of a wild horse. This was deliberate, heavy, carrying weight and purpose. For a moment she feared it was the men returning. She braced herself, heart pounding. But as the rider came into view, outlined by the last light of sunset, she saw it wasn't them. The figure sat tall in the saddle, moving with confidence, not cruelty. His silhouette cut through the golden dust like a blade. He wasn't rushing. He wasn't lost. He was coming straight toward her. And even before he reached her, something inside her shifted, just a small flicker. But it was enough to make her lift her head, enough to make her hold on a little longer, enough to tell her that maybe, just maybe, her story wasn't over yet. The rider slowed his horse as he approached, his eyes fixed on the figure hanging between the trees. Dust swirled around him in soft spirals, catching the fading light and making his silhouette look almost carved from the desert itself. He didn't speak at first. He didn't call out to her. He simply observed, quiet, steady, taking in every detail the way a seasoned man of the West learns to do. The woman forced herself to look up, though her eyelids felt like they weighed 100 pounds. She saw him clearly now. A cowboy. Tall, weathered. Hat pulled low, shielding eyes that didn't miss a thing. He stopped a few feet away and dismounted in one smooth motion. His boots hit the ground with a firm thud, and his hand rested lightly on the handle of his revolver, not in threat, but in readiness. He scanned the canyon walls, the tracks in the dirt, the horse she had ridden earlier lying just beyond the trees, too exhausted to get far. Everything around them spoke a silent truth, and he listened to all of it. Then, after a long moment, he stepped toward her. His boots pressed into the soft earth with slow, heavy steps, each one controlled. He didn't rush. He didn't stumble. He moved like a man who had seen enough violence to know that danger often lingered even when things looked still. The closer he came, the more she could see the lines on his face, sharp lines, carved from years of sun and grit and survival. But his eyes were calm, focused, steady. They weren't cruel like the men who had tied her up. They weren't mocking or hungry. They held something else, something protective. He reached the trees and stopped right in front of her, his breath shallow as he looked at the ropes digging into her wrists. He didn't touch her yet. He just studied the knots, the way they were tied, the force used. His jaw tightened. His eyes narrowed. It was as though he could see the story written into every cruel fiber. "You hurt bad?" he finally asked, his voice low and rough, like he hadn't spoken in hours. She tried to answer, but her throat felt too dry, the words too heavy. She managed a small shake of her head, though the pain of moving made her wince. He nodded once, a soft acknowledgement, then reached for his knife. The blade glinted as he pulled it from his belt. It wasn't a big knife, just sharp, clean, and well cared for. He lifted one of her arms gently, supporting her weight so the rope didn't bite deeper. She felt his touch, steady and warm, and her body instinctively relaxed even though her mind screamed for alertness. With one smooth swipe he cut the rope. Her arm dropped slightly, but he caught it before it fell too fast, lowering it carefully. "Easy," he murmured. He moved to the other side and cut the second rope. When her body collapsed forward, he stepped in quickly, wrapping one arm around her back to keep her from falling to the ground. She gasped as the sudden rush of blood hit her numb limbs, sending a sharp sting through her muscles. He held her upright, letting her lean into him until she found enough balance to stand on her own. She could feel the strength in him, solid, grounded, as unshakable as the cliffs around them. He eased her down to sit at the base of one of the trees. Her legs trembled uncontrollably as soon as they touched the earth, and he steadied her shoulder. She opened her mouth, trying to speak, but only a hoarse whisper escaped. I know," he said quietly, not letting her strain. "Save your breath." He reached into his saddlebag and brought out a small flask. He uncorked it and held it to her lips. She hesitated at first. Trust was something she didn't have much left of, but her thirst won. The water was warm, but it tasted like life. She drank small gulps until the tightness in her throat eased. He pulled it back gently. "That's enough for now," he said. She looked up at him, studying his face through the haze of exhaustion. Who was he? Why was he here? What kind of man rode alone through a canyon at dusk? He didn't introduce himself, didn't ask for her name. He seemed more concerned with the world around them than with small talk. His eyes kept drifting to the ground, analyzing tracks, searching for signs of where the men went and whether they were close. He stood after a moment, his hand drifting back to his revolver as he scanned the canyon again. "They did this not long ago," he said, reading the earth like a book. "Tracks are fresh. They're ridden slow." Fear flared in her chest. She looked toward the empty trail, imagining those cruel faces returning, laughing like before. Her hands trembled and she pulled them close, rubbing the raw marks on her wrists. He noticed. "They ain't touching you again," he said, his voice suddenly firm like steel wrapped in calm. "Not while I'm standing." The way he said it wasn't a boast, not a threat thrown into the wind. It was a promise. A simple, absolute statement of fact. Something in the weight of his tone made her believe him. He crouched beside her, lowering himself to her level. His movements were still slow, still controlled, as if he didn't want to frighten her any more than she already was. "You got a name?" he asked. She hesitated, then whispered it. He repeated it under his breath, making sure he said it right, as if her name mattered, as if she mattered. "I'm gonna get you out of here," he told her. "But first we need to move. They'll come back when they feel like it. Men like that don't leave loose ends." Her stomach tightened. She didn't know how she would stand, let alone walk, but the cowboy didn't give her false comfort. He simply offered his hand. She stared at it, rough, scarred, steady. For the first time since the attack, she didn't feel alone. And when she finally placed her trembling hand in his, it was the first moment she felt like she might actually survive whatever came next. He helped her rise slowly, letting her lean against him until her legs stopped shaking. Every small movement made her wince, and he adjusted his pace to match her weakness. When she finally stood steady enough to take a step on her own, he guided her toward his horse. But before they reached it, he stopped. His head turned sharply toward the canyon trail behind them. His eyes narrowed. The sound reached them a moment later, faint but unmistakable. Hoofbeats, more than one, slow, confident, not hurried. The kind of rhythm men fall into when they believe they own the land beneath them. Her breath caught and fear surged through her all over again. She knew that sound. She remembered it from before when they first chased her. It made her stomach twist painfully. Her hands trembled and she instinctively stepped closer to the cowboy, her shoulder brushing his arm. He didn't flinch, didn't step back, didn't show an ounce of fear. Instead, his posture changed completely. His back straightened. His stance widened. He became still, so still that even the wind seemed to pause for him. "Stay behind me," he said quietly without turning. She obeyed immediately. She didn't need to ask why. The cowboy took a few steps forward, placing himself fully between her and the approaching riders. With a calm hand, he loosened the strap holding his revolver in place. His fingers brushed the worn handle, familiar and steady. He didn't draw it yet. He didn't need to. The simple act of resting his hand there said enough. The hoofbeats grew louder. The canyon magnified the sound, making it echo off the stone walls like the drumbeat of an approaching storm. Dust rose along the trail before she even saw the first horse. Then, through the haze, the three riders appeared. It was them. The same men with cruel smiles and eyes that held no mercy. They rode casually, smirking when they spotted her standing free from the ropes. One of them let out a low chuckle, nudging the man beside him. "Well, look at that," he called out, mocking amusement dripping from his voice. Little Bird got loose. Another tilted his head toward the cowboy, and she found herself a hero. The leader, the one who'd tied the first knot around her wrists, leaned forward in his saddle. His grin widened, ugly and mean. "You best step aside, stranger," he said. "She ain't yours." The cowboy didn't move, didn't blink, didn't even shift his weight. "No," he said, voice low and steady. "She ain't yours either." The men exchanged glances. Their grins faded a little, replaced with a flicker of annoyance. The leader pushed his horse forward a few steps. "You got a death wish?" he asked. "We ain't looking for trouble. But if you want yourself a bullet, we can save you the time." The cowboy finally lifted his chin. His eyes locked onto the leader's with a coldness that could freeze fire. "Touch her again," he said, each word deliberate, "and die." The canyon held its breath. For a heartbeat, no one moved. No one spoke. Even the wind seemed to stay still, listening. Then the leader barked a laugh, though it lacked the confidence from before. "You really think you can take three of us?" The cowboy didn't answer with words. He answered by moving his hand. In one lightning-fast motion, he drew his revolver. The metal flashed in the dying sunlight, and before the men even realized what happened, the barrel was pointed directly at the leader's chest. "You can test me," the cowboy said, "if you're feeling brave." The leader froze, eyes flicking between the gun and the cowboy's face. He hadn't expected that speed, or that certainty. Men who talk big usually hesitate. Men who mean what they say don't. The second rider shifted nervously, his horse pawing at the dirt. "Boss, maybe we—" "Shut up," the leader snapped, though his voice cracked slightly. The cowboy didn't move an inch. His arm was steady, his aim perfect. His breathing was slow, controlled. He wasn't bluffing. He wasn't hoping they'd back down. He was prepared to do whatever came next. She watched from behind, her heart pounding so loudly she wondered if they could hear it. She had never seen anyone like him. She had never seen a single man stand so calmly against so much danger. The leader tried a different approach, lifting his hand slightly. "Look, we ain't gotta fight. We just came back for what's ours." "She ain't something to own," the cowboy replied. "She's a problem," the leader hissed, "and problems need finishing." The cowboy's voice dropped to a level so quiet it was almost a whisper, but it carried the weight of a thunderstorm. "She's under my protection now." The leader's temper snapped. He jerked his hand toward his holster in a reckless attempt to draw, but he was too slow. A single gunshot cracked through the canyon. The cowboy had fired first. The leader's gun spun from his hand and clattered to the ground. His fingers went numb, pain shooting up his arm as he clutched his wrist and let out a guttural cry. His horse reared, nearly throwing him off. The other two men scrambled back, their bravado gone in an instant. One of them nearly lost control of his reins. The cowboy remained exactly where he stood, revolver still raised, unfazed by the chaos he had caused. "Pick him up," the cowboy ordered, voice cutting like a blade. "And get out. You come back, I finish what I started." No one argued. No one even dared to look him in the eye. The men grabbed their wounded leader and turned their horses sharply, kicking up clouds of dust as they fled down the trail, vanishing into the canyon's deepening shadows. The silence that followed felt different than before, not empty but charged, heavy, alive. The cowboy finally lowered his gun, blowing softly across the barrel before sliding it back into the holster. He exhaled once, slow and quiet, as if letting the moment bleed out of him. Then he turned back to her. "You're safe now," he said, calm returning to his voice. But the way he looked at the trail told her he wasn't done yet. Not even close. He holstered his revolver and walked back toward her with the same steady steps he'd taken when he first approached. The danger had passed for the moment, but the tension still clung to the air like dust after a storm. She watched him silently, her pulse slowly settling, though her hands still trembled with leftover fear. When he reached her, he didn't speak right away. He crouched beside her again, making sure she could see his face clearly, showing her there was no threat in his presence. "You hurt anywhere worse than your wrists?" he asked, voice soft now, almost gentle. She shook her head, but the motion was weak. He noticed. He slipped his hand beneath her elbow, helping her lower herself to the ground in a slow, controlled descent. She sat down with a quiet groan, her muscles aching from the strain of hours spent hanging between the trees. The cowboy knelt beside her and checked the raw marks on her skin. They were red, swollen, and angry-looking. "I'll clean that up when we get somewhere safer," he said. His words were calm, but she noticed something else, something deep behind his eyes. It wasn't just concern. It was something heavier, like the echo of a memory he wished he could forget. She opened her mouth to speak, but the words tangled in her throat. Everything still felt overwhelming. He reached into his saddlebag again and pulled out a small cloth bundle tied with leather strips. Inside were strips of fabric, a small metal tin, and a simple wooden needle, tools carefully wrapped and well used. He set them beside her but didn't start bandaging yet. Instead, he handed her the flask again. "Drink slow," he said. She obeyed, sipping carefully as he moved to sit beside her. The canyon felt bigger now, quieter but still holding the tension of what had just happened. The cowboy kept an eye on the trail, watching the dust settle where the men had fled. Only when he was certain they were gone did he let his shoulders drop slightly. "You did good," he said finally, turning to her. "Staying quiet, staying still. Most folks panic." She let out a weak, breathless laugh. I didn't feel brave." "Don't need to feel brave to survive," he replied. "Just need to hold on. You did." The warmth in his voice surprised her. He wasn't just trying to comfort her, he meant it. She stared at him for a moment, truly seeing him now. His coat was worn at the edges. His boots carried years of dust. His face held the kind of lines carved by more than sun and wind, lines made by loss, by choices, by weight carried alone. "You've done this before," she whispered. He didn't answer at first. His eyes drifted away, staring at something far beyond the canyon walls. "A long time ago," he said finally. "Didn't end like this one." She waited, sensing there was more. And after a long pause, he continued. "I had a sister," he said quietly. "You look 'bout her age, same spirit, same way of looking at the world like it owed her a little kindness." His voice remained steady, but she could hear the strain hanging in it like a tight thread. "One day she crossed paths with the wrong kind of men. I got there too late. By the time I found her," he stopped, jaw tightening. "I swore I'd never ride past another person in danger. Not again. Not ever." The canyon grew still. Even the wind seemed to pause out of respect for his pain. She looked down at her hands, fingers trembling again, this time not from fear, but from the weight of his story. She didn't know what to say. She didn't know if anything she could say would matter. He didn't look at her. He reached for the cloth strips instead. "Let me bandage those wrists," he murmured. She nodded. This time, she didn't hesitate when he took her arm gently into his hands. His touch was firm but careful, as if he feared breaking what little strength she had left. He wrapped the cloth around her wounds, tying each bandage neatly. When he finished, he moved to her other arm. She watched him work, noticing how precise he was, how patient. His hands were rough, calloused, but steady, hands that had spent a lifetime doing hard things, hands that knew how to protect and how to heal in the same breath. When he finished, he leaned back on his heels. "That should hold until we reach town," he said. "Town?" she asked softly. He nodded. "Closest one's half a day's ride. You can rest there, get help. Folks'll treat you right." She hesitated, looking toward the trail. "What about them? What if they come back?" He looked at her then, really looked at her, with a kind of steady certainty that made her breath slow. "They ain't comin' back tonight," he said. "Not after what they saw, and if they do, I'll deal with them." His tone left no room for doubt. He stood and offered his hand again, the same way he had earlier. She stared at it, remembering how safe she'd felt when she took it the first time. She placed her hand in his, and he lifted her gently to her feet. "You'll ride with me," he said. "I'll keep you steady." She nodded, trusting him without needing to think twice. He guided her toward his horse, helping her mount with slow, careful movements. When she settled into the saddle, he placed one hand on her back to support her, then swung up behind her. The warmth of him, the steadiness, made her feel grounded in a way she hadn't felt since before the attack. As he gathered the reins, she leaned back just slightly, finding strength in his presence. The canyon stretched wide before them, shadows long and darkening as the sky shifted into early night. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time since the moment she'd been captured, she didn't feel hopeless. She felt protected. She felt safe. And as the cowboy nudged the horse forward, she closed her eyes for a moment and let the rhythm of the ride pull her away from the memory of those cruel ropes, carrying her towards something she hadn't dared believe in anymore, a chance to live. The horse moved at a steady pace, its hooves striking the ground in a soft, rhythmic pattern that echoed through the canyon. Night settled slowly over the land, turning the sky from gold to deep purple. The first stars blinked awake, scattered across the darkness like tiny lanterns guiding them forward. She sat close against the cowboy, feeling the quiet strength in his posture. Each breath he took was calm, controlled, and somehow that steadiness eased the storm still lingering inside her. He hadn't spoken since they began riding, but it wasn't an uncomfortable silence. It felt like something shared, like the canyon itself knew not to break the fragile calm they were holding onto. The air grew cooler. The wind brushed past her face, carrying the dusty scent of sage and distant campfires. She kept her gaze on the winding trail ahead, watching as it stretched into the unknown. After a while, the cowboy shifted slightly, adjusting his coat around her shoulders. She hadn't realized how cold she had become until the warmth settled over her like a protective shield. "You're shiverin'," he said quietly. She hadn't wanted to complain. She'd already relied on him more than she'd ever relied on anyone. But his voice carried no judgment, just understanding. She nodded, pulling the coat closer. "Thank you," she whispered. He tapped the horse gently, urging it into a smoother rhythm. For a minute he didn't say anything else. Then, in a voice low enough that she almost missed it, he added, "Ain't no trouble." The trail narrowed again, forcing the horse to move single file between tall rock walls. Their shadows stretched long across the ground, tangled with the horse's movements. She listened to the steady thump of hooves, the soft jingle of the reins, the quiet creak of the saddle. Each sound felt grounding, like the world was slowly stitching itself back together around her. "Do you always ride alone?" she asked after a while, her voice barely above a murmur. He breathed out slowly as if choosing his words with care. "Most times, Worlds quieter that way, cleaner. She understood what he meant. There were people who made the world heavier, darker, dangerous. She had met them. She had suffered under their hands. But there were also people like him, people who stepped into the darkness and cut through it without asking for anything in return. She wondered what life had shaped him into this kind of man. A protector, a fighter, a man who carried the weight of old pain like a silent companion. "You didn't have to stop," she said softly. He didn't answer right away. She felt the rise and fall of his chest behind her, a slow rhythm that matched the horse's movement. "No," he said eventually, "but I had to. There's a difference." She turned her head just slightly, catching a glimpse of him from the corner of her eye. The moonlight brushed across his jawline, highlighting the rough stubble, the hard lines, the quiet strength. "I'm glad you did," she said. He tipped his hat forward a little, almost like he was trying to hide a thought he didn't want her to see. "World needs people who step in," he said. "Else it gets taken over by the kind that tied you to them trees." She swallowed hard at the reminder. The ropes, the fear, the helplessness. But before the memory could drag her under again, he placed a steady hand on her side, not tight, not invasive. Just firm enough to remind her she wasn't alone. "You're safe now," he said again, quieter than before. "Ain't nobody touching you, not while I'm breathin'." His promise wrapped around her like armor. She believed him, not because of his words alone, but because of everything he had done without hesitation. There was a weight to him, a solidity that made her think he had kept a promise like this before, maybe more than once. As the trail widened, they rode side by side with the open plain stretching before them. The stars above brightened, and the moon shone down like a silver torch. She felt small in that vastness, but also strangely safe. The cowboy's presence made the world feel less unpredictable. "Will those men follow?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. He shook his head. "Not tonight. They're hurt, scared. They know what I can do." His confidence wasn't arrogance. It was experience, spoken in the kind of calm tone only a man who'd survived many fights could use. She let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. "You think they'll stop?" she asked. He gave a slow, thoughtful exhale. "Men like that don't stop easy, but that's not your worry anymore." "Then whose worry is it?" she whispered. His grip on the reins tightened just a little. "Mine." His answer landed heavy in the air, but she didn't argue. Deep down, she sensed he had already decided. He had seen what they were capable of. He had seen what they did to her. Men like him didn't just walk away from something like that. Not when they carried a past that shadowed their every step. The horse climbed a small ridge, and when they reached the top, they slowed. Below them, the land opened wide, rolling hills, scattered lights from distant farms, the faint outline of a town resting quietly under the night sky. It felt like a promise, a new beginning, a place where she could breathe again. "You'll be safe there," he said. She leaned back slightly, letting her head rest for a brief moment against his shoulder. The exhaustion weighed on her, but it felt different now. Not frightening, not hopeless, just real, just human. "Will you stay?" she asked softly, almost afraid to hear the answer. He didn't reply right away. The silence stretched long, filled only by the moonlit wind and the soft rhythm of the horse. Then he said, in a voice gentle but carrying something unspoken beneath it, "Long enough to make sure you're all right." She closed her eyes, letting those words settle deep inside her. For the first time since the men seized her, her heart felt steady. For the first time since she hung between those trees, she felt like her story wasn't ending. It was just beginning.